Oh, it's good to laugh a little bit. Well, good morning and welcome to the Berean Bible Students Church. We are glad that you are here. We are continuing in our message in our series about Jesus, our message and our mission. And so one of the things that we talked about last week was the concept of serving as our privilege. And I love that video because it's an opportunity to show service. And to show joy about it and the benefits that came out of it. So again, I'm glad you guys enjoyed that. So over the course of 6 weeks, Andy, Joe, and I have and will be addressing the topics that you see up there on the screen. And so this week I'll be sharing a message on the generosity of joy. And so one of the things I want to get out there first as we start off is that when I talk about generosity today, I want to make sure that you are not just focusing on being generous financially. Even if that is kind of the thing that comes to your mind most often and maybe is even the thing I talk about the most, don't just focus on money. You can be generous in many other ways, such as you can be generous with your time. Okay? You can be generous with your encouragement. You can be generous in your sacrifice. You can be generous with your forgiveness. So there's a lot of ways in which you can be generous. So sometimes when we give to God, we are tempted to ask, how little can I get by with? So when I first became a believer in high school, there was that mentality that was in my head. That is kind of how I thought. And as I moved into college, I didn't have a lot, and there was always somewhere to spend the money that I had. So when I gave to God, it was more like a tip than anything else. It was a few dollars here and a few dollars there, but somewhere along the line, I discovered that generosity was a lot more about what I kept rather than what I gave. And when it doesn't cost us anything, are we really being generous? The essence of generosity is self-sacrifice. Because you can give without being generous. It is possible for you to give without being generous. The Christian life is not so much external actions. Our Christian walk is not something that we do out of guilt or out of obligation. But really what we do it in response to the love and the generosity of God. It's a generosity that we try, right? We try to imitate as we seek to be more like Jesus Christ. We serve a generous God. The Bible is filled with verses that suggest God is indeed very generous. So starting in the early chapters of the book of Genesis, where Moses writes, God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with it, fruit with seed in it. It'll be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food, and it was so. So we see the generosity of God expressed first and foremost in the creation of the world and the creation of man. But we know that God didn't just create and then step aside, right? God continued to be very involved in creation. I don't see God just creating the world, winding it up like a clock, sending it up on a pedestal, and then just ignoring it. He continues to be actively involved in the creation and the work of this world. So God continues to create, to renew, and to sustain the world. John 1:16 reads, from the fullness of his grace, we continue to receive one blessing after another. We serve a generous God who just loves to give. The greatest manifestation of his generosity was expressed in the sending of his son, Jesus Christ. So if we desire to be disciples of Jesus Christ, ordinary people that are learning to live like Jesus, then we too will develop to seek and want to develop this spirit of generosity. But in order to do this more effectively, we have to push aside some false narratives about giving. And many of these false ideas are not only unbiblical, but they create in us, in me sometimes, an automatic response that hinders my ability to give. It blocks out the responsibility to give, and it can remove the joy of being generous. So when we begin to wean ourselves from some of these false ideas and their related automatic responses, we will begin to be more generous people, okay? And we'll begin to see that not only is the kingdom of God that Jesus talked about a safe place to live, it really is a safe place to give. So the first false idea that hinders some of our generous spirit is what I call the "it's mine" syndrome. Now, this is a syndrome that starts very early in age, sometimes as early as 2 or 3 years old. And if you have a child or you have a grandchild that is in that age range, before long, somebody is going to take something from that child. And what is that child's response? "It's mine, give it back, it's mine." The reality is, no matter how successful the parents are at teaching the child about sharing, the kids carry a certain amount of "it's mine" syndrome into adult life. It begins to manifest itself in the sense of entitlement. I'm entitled because I have money, because I have these possessions, because I have this wealth, because I'm entitled to use it in any way that I want for my pleasure. So we can see it manifest itself in a variety of ways. It's an unwillingness to share things like your tools. It's an unwillingness to give of your time. It's an unwillingness to forgive and offer grace. It's an unwillingness to adjust your preferences because what I want, of course, is best. So I don't need to adjust what I want. So it's an unwillingness to adjust your preferences. All the while, like a disappointed parent, God is sitting back and saying, "Man, I wish they could just learn how to share better." Now, I'll pause here for a moment and say that I know some of you may already be giving a little bit of internal pushback because you say, I really do work hard for the money I make and for the time I have, so I have the right to do with it whatever I want. So in sense, I totally understand your thinking. However, in another sense, I struggle to fully understand it because of what we're told in Deuteronomy. It is God who gives us the ability to create wealth. Right? Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "Remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth." God created us, and God gives us the ability to produce wealth, which basically means we don't own anything. We don't own anything. We are simply the stewards of God's things. When we realize that, the question changes from how we can use the stuff to maximize our comfort and pleasure to how can we use all God's given us to maximize His glory. That requires a shift in mindset. When you begin to make that shift, you begin to break down the "it's mine" syndrome and find yourself starting to become a more generous person. The second false idea, as it relates to generosity, is the idea of scarcity. Scarcity in general is the idea that there is only so much to go around in the world. So I better get my hands on what I can before everybody else gets it first. So I can remember going to a birthday party when I was in high school, and there were a number of brownies, right, set on a tray in the kitchen. And a classmate of mine, and it really isn't me, I'm not trying to hide this, all right, a classmate of mine walked out of the kitchen with like 6 to 8 brownies on a plate. And I remember asking him, like, man, why'd you take so many brownies? And his answer was, well, I want to get them before other people have a chance. I want to make sure I get all that I can. That mindset, okay, that mindset is another one of many results of Adam and Eve's sin in the garden, okay? God told Adam and Eve that they could have anything they wanted. They could eat of any tree in the garden except the tree in the center of the garden. Stay away from that tree. Don't eat the fruit from it. There was plenty and there was no scarcity. With a little bit of prompting by Satan, they became disobedient and they ate the forbidden fruit. Because of that, their life was never the same and scarcity became a reality. Adam and Eve had everything they needed, but when they ate from the forbidden fruit, they not only lost their relationship with God, but they lost God as their primary caregiver, the person who would care for their needs. They not only got kicked out of the garden, but fear kicked in. They were fearful that they would not be able to provide for themselves. Okay? I'm speculating, but I'm imagining that is the case. The concept of fear that I can never have enough for myself. All the people down through history spend most of their time trying to possess, trying to get things in their hands, like wealth, like money, possessions, and the power that goes along with it, just so they can create some sense of security that was lost in the garden. But as we know, if somebody is seeking security or significance out of people, places, things, or money, they are never going to be satisfied. They can never get enough. Because of that, right, we see all sorts of symptoms of that insecurity, right? We see various degrees of hoarding and greed and crime related to thefts of things and money. When we do this, we become less generous and less giving. Generosity is our joy. Generosity is our joy because we are kingdom people. The concept of scarcity does not exist in the kingdom of God. It is God who has been trying to break us of that idea ever since Adam and Eve were removed from the garden. I mean, there's the story in Exodus, right? When the Israelites, they had just gotten released from slavery. A couple million went out into the wilderness, and they began walking and ended up in the wilderness for 40 years. They couldn't really provide for themselves. They had to depend on God for their needs. God said, you know what, I'll provide for you, but I'm only going to provide enough for each day. So he provided this thing called manna, right? So if we look at Exodus, we can read, when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is this? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Okay, so again, gather as much as they need. If you remember from that story, the ones that took more than they needed, it rotted and had maggots all over it. Maybe God was trying to teach something to them, and he is trying to teach something to us, that we need to trust God for our daily needs and take what we need. Right? In fact, when we recite the Lord's Prayer, what do we say? Give us this day our daily bread. Give us what we need, just for today. But for some reason, we feel like we have this need to accumulate, to consume, and to get as much as we possibly can. So in order to overcome this scarcity mindset, we need to remember that we are kingdom people. We live differently. We see things differently. In the kingdom of God, there is no scarcity. When we begin to embrace that idea, we demonstrate it by exhibiting generosity within a culture that lives in a posture of scarcity. Then others can see something is different about us. We speak to the idea that we serve a God not of scarcity, but a God of abundance. So the next fallacy we have to consider, which is something somewhat related to what I just talked about, that of scarcity, is the false notion that if I give, I will have less. And from the world's perspective, right, this makes mathematical sense. All right, so if I have $100 and I give 10, then I have $90 left. That's math, right? If I have 10 hours of leisure time and I give 2, then I only have 8 hours left. Well, as a mathematician, the following statement is incredibly difficult for me to say. But we need to remember that God's principles of math are not quite the same as ours. When we give, God tends to give back more than we gave. Jesus suggests this in Luke 6:38, right? Where it's written, give and it will be given to you. Give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. There is a principle related to this message. It's called the principle of release. When you let go of things, God lets go of what he holds. His reservoir of everything begins to flow back towards you. We see some blessings from God. We can think we have it all. However, God has more for you. God is filling the cup up for you, that just for you to give some of it away, filling it up so much that it's going to pour out over your lap. So the fourth fallacy really is that I get to decide who is worthy of my giving. Now, this is a tough one. Okay, this is a tough one. So anyone familiar with Jesus' words, God helps those who help themselves? Anyone familiar with Jesus' words that say, God helps those who help themselves? Yeah, Jesus didn't say that. Okay? It was really Benjamin Franklin who said that. Okay? And it's a very unbiblical statement. Because as we know, right, God doesn't just help the people that can help themselves. God is one who decides to help people who can't help themselves. Or another judgment or saying that people fall into is this one. That, they just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Basically, what is being said, right, is a person needs to lift oneself out of a difficult situation using only one's own resources with no one else's help. Now, I hope you all know that it is physically impossible to actually pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. Gravity is too difficult of an opponent. You can't win. And when we make judgments about the unworthiness of a person, then we begin to go down a very dangerous path. How about a doctor saying to a patient, you know what, you didn't exercise like I told you to. You didn't eat less and lose weight like I told you. You didn't cut down on your salt intake like I told you. Now that you are sitting here right in front of me with chest pains, I am just going to let you suffer and not help you. You brought this on yourself, so it isn't my responsibility. We could look at dozens of passages that counter this mindset, right? We look at Psalm 146. It reads, "He, the Lord, upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous." God helps those who can't help themselves. We should help those as well who can't help themselves. So often, what do we do instead? We're maybe quick to judge. It might be somebody who is dressed not quite the right way, or they're maybe just sitting on the side of the road. Our hesitancy could be because of maybe the color of their skin or their ethnicity. We automatically make value judgments that say, I don't have to help that person because that person is not worthy. It relieves, right? That thought process, it relieves the guilt from us, but it also hinders generosity. Now, of course, we have to make judgments about who and where to give, right? You have to make those decisions. But this fallacy hopefully makes you think about the why you aren't being generous to somebody in some situations. Just make you think about that a little bit. Because we have to be careful about judging people so that we will feel justified by not giving. So if you're in that position, please be aware of this. So this brings me to my fifth fallacy. And the fifth fallacy is that a Christian must tithe. Okay, that a Christian must tithe. Right? In modern terms, it means a Christian should give 10% of their income to the church. Now, it finds biblical basis all through the Old Testament in so many passages. And one of the passages that is most clear comes from the prophet Malachi, right? He kind of says, bring a whole tithe into the storehouse that there may be food in my house. So to say a Christian must tithe is to fall back into legalism. It is to fall back into the law that says if you do this, then God will do that. We are not a people of the law. We are a people of grace. The grace that has flowed down from heaven into us, into our hearts, through the love of God, and our giving is an expression that comes out of the heart. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 9:7, each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly, nor under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. This flies in the face of the idea that we are required to tithe. When we give, we do what springs from our hearts. There is no requirement. I do believe in the concept of giving 10% is a wonderful one. It is a wonderful one. However, tithing does not mean we have no other obligation to give. It's not a simple check mark on your I'm a good Christian checklist, and we can just move on. Tithing should be the beginning of our giving and not the end. It's not about the percentage, right? You can give God 10% of your money and none of your heart. Generosity isn't just giving. You can give and not be generous. Generous isn't an amount, it's a principle. If generosity was simply a percentage or an amount, then generosity would look the same for me as it does for the richest person in the world. The reality is there are some people that because of the season of life or the situation they are in, maybe they are just not able to give 10%. But there are also people that give 10% who are in a position where they could give a lot more. Not just 10%, but maybe 30 or 40 or 50%. If some people are giving, it may be a few bucks. In some people, 5%. And in some 10%, some 50%. Whatever you do it with a cheerful attitude. When you begin to let go of this 10% figure, the question becomes not how much of my money should I give to the church, but how much of God's money do I use for myself? A number of years ago, some of us took Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. The last baby step he shares is to build wealth and give. To build wealth and give. And his line that he uses is, live like no one else so that you can give like no one else. We need to be careful of wrapping the idea of giving and generosity around some sort of number. It really boils down to a heart issue. Jesus always wanted to get to the heart of the situation. What is going inside of here? What's going inside of here and here? What are those automatic responses that you are feeling that keep you from being a generous person? Begin to filter through those things and think through them and begin to ask yourself, how has God blessed me? How has God blessed me? And what should my response be to that blessing? We covered pretty well generosity with money, but being generous with one's time is also a challenge. So how many of us are sometimes too busy to serve? Now, I remember in grade school, sitting in grade school, and I was told how much harder junior high would be. Then as I'm sitting in junior high, I'm told how much harder high school will be. Then as you're sitting in high school, you're told, oh, how hard college will be. And then, oh my gosh, just wait until you start in the work world, how hard things will be. Now, actually, I think people were right. Each level was harder. But strangely enough, I somehow found really good ways to waste time and still get everything done. I must admit, I am a master at finding a way to get things done even as I waste time. Learning when to say no can be a challenge. But I dare say most of us, many of us, tend to say, we maybe don't say yes as often as we maybe could. Great is the church that is filled with willing volunteers, right? Last week I talked about this and I shared the church works best when every attendee is working. As Christians, we need to be aware of our fellow Christians around us because only in that way can we know when and where we can help. Giving of our time and talents can be a struggle, but it's important to acknowledge that struggle. So do you remember the story of when Jesus fed the 5,000? Thousands of folks had come out to hear Jesus preach. And at the end of the day, he asked his disciples how they could feed the crowd. Nobody seems to have a good answer until Andrew arrives with this unlikely solution, right? Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. He says, there's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with such a huge crowd? Now, I want us to think about this story maybe slightly differently than you ever have. In this story, I can't imagine there weren't people in the crowd of this size who had food. Seriously, right? Moms are moms. Okay, moms are moms. All right, and there had to be a mom in the crowd who thought about the day ahead of time and said, all right, we got to pack some extra food, right? We got to be prepared for what's coming because moms are moms. So I believe that there had to be other people in the crowd that had food. There had to be other people in the crowd that had food. But this boy was the one who offered it. This boy was the one who offered it. It was all he had. You really can't fault the other people, right? They were hungry, and when they looked at the crowd, the size they were in, they knew that their little bit couldn't really make a difference. But the boy didn't see the crowd. He just knew that Jesus was looking for food, and he had food to offer. And you know what happened? From that one boy's generosity, right? Jesus fed the crowd and had leftovers besides. So I wonder what God can do with our generosity. Now, again, look at the screen here. As you think about this church, this is our church's generosity over the years. Not complete, right? There's more than that, but this is a listing of our generosity over the years. We have given to so many groups outside of our walls and been a huge help to them. We have supported individuals who were in need. Our church is small but mighty. Our church is small but mighty. There are people that you will never meet in this life who are alive today because of the gifts you made. Imagine the people who could be touched, the lives that could be changed, and the futures that could be impacted through the generosity of God's people. Look at that. We've impacted so many. People just need to be willing to give like the boy in the crowd. I have always felt that God was honoring whatever we were doing and giving us the strength to do what was necessary. Now, we are going through a challenging time as a church. And I think about what has happened in our church and what is happening, and I'm aware of one important thing. It is going to take an ongoing, active group of individuals to give of their time, their talents, their money for us to continue to make the difference in the lives of people who attend BBSC now and in the future and those outside of these walls. As we move into the future, if we are going to impact the lives that we need to impact, if we are going to introduce more and more families to Jesus, if we're going to see more marriages salvaged and more teens kept out of potentially dangerous situations, it's because of the change in focus and priorities. It'll because you and me continue to be generous with our time, with our preferences, and with our forgiveness, and with our money. Oftentimes, Paul uses the analogy of a farmer and the seed. In that culture, most people would know how things were grown. And so Paul compares our giving to seeds. Plant a few seeds, get a small crop. Plant generously and reap a generous harvest. But here's the catch. Here's the catch. You have to believe in what you are planting. If you don't believe that the crop is in the seed, you will never plant it. You won't make the effort. We need to continually pray, asking how we can serve, how we can give, and ask for strength to do so. Now, for some of you sitting here, watching at home, you might, and I know you are, in a position where you can't do as much as you would like to do, as much as you previously have done, all right? And so your life situation has changed. But no matter your physical limitations, you can always pray. There is absolutely nothing better than a praying church. So let me leave you today with 3 scripture verses that I hope encourage you as much as they encourage me. So the first is 1 Corinthians 15:58. It says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." 2 Corinthians 8:7. "But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in the grace of giving." And lastly, 2 Corinthians 9:8. "God is able to make all grace abound to you." God is able to make all grace abound to you. "So then, all things at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work." There is joy. There is joy in giving back what he has already given you. So at BBSC, generosity is truly our joy. Let's close with some songs.